2 men. 2 rings. One impossible choice sitting in Angela Coleman's coat pocket at exactly the same time. In her left pocket, a 2-carat ring from a man worth $11 billion, who paid off her mother's hospital bill without blinking, without asking, without making her beg for it. In her right pocket, a plain gold band from the man she has loved since she was 15 years old. A high school teacher in Atlanta making $51,000 a year, who has nothing to offer her but himself. She has 48 hours to decide. One man can save her family. The other man already saved her. This is the story of the hardest choice Angela Coleman ever made. And the 2 words that changed everything, right before she said I do.
If you're watching this, I'd love to get to know you. Please comment your location and the time below. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our next story. Thank you so much for being here today.
Angela Coleman worked 12-hour shifts in the emergency room at Grady Memorial Hospital. Overnight shifts, mostly the ones nobody fought her for. Gunshot wounds at 2 in the morning. Car accidents on I-20. Elderly men who waited 3 days too long to come in, because they didn't want to be a burden. It was the kind of job that taught you fast that money doesn't buy time, but it sure buys options. And Angela had spent her whole life watching families run out of both. She grew up in East Atlanta, in a small brick house on a street where everybody knew everybody's business. Raised by her mother, Deborah, after her father passed when Angela was 9. Congestive heart failure. Quick in the end, though it hadn't felt quick living through it. Deborah worked 2 jobs after that. Days at a dry cleaner's, evenings cleaning offices downtown, to keep Angela in a good school district and new shoes every fall. Angela never forgot the sound of her mother's keys in the door at 11 at night, every single night. Exhausted but still asking about Angela's homework before she even took her coat off. She became a nurse because she wanted to be the person in the room who could actually do something when a family was scared. For years at Georgia State, nursing boards passed on the first try, and straight into Grady's ER, the busiest trauma center in the state. Her co-workers called her Steady Coleman because nothing rattled her. Not the blood, not the screaming, not the 12-hour shifts back to back. What rattled her, though nobody at work ever saw it, was the drive home. Because 2 years before this story begins, Deborah Coleman was diagnosed with stage 3 kidney disease. Dialysis 3 times a week, for hours a session. A transplant list with an 18-month average wait in Georgia, longer for Black patients. A statistic Angela knew cold because she'd looked it up herself at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep. And medical bills. The kind that don't announce themselves all at once, but arrive steadily month after month, until they've eaten through your savings, then your retirement account, then your credit, then whatever pride you had left about asking anybody for help. Angela never told anyone how bad it had gotten. Not her co-workers. Not her church family. Not even Malik. Malik Turner had known Angela since they were freshmen at Frederick Douglass High School, sitting 2 seats apart in Mr. Higgins's algebra class, both of them terrible at algebra, both of them too proud to admit it to anyone but each other. He taught 11th grade U.S. history now, 2 miles from where Angela grew up, at a school not so different from the one they'd both walked the halls of 17 years earlier. He coached the boys' basketball team on weekends at a rec center with a scoreboard that had been broken for 2 years and a promise from Malik, every fall, that he'd finally fix it. He'd been quietly in love with Angela Coleman, since before either of them knew what to call it. They'd almost gotten together a dozen times over the years. Junior prom, when he almost said something in the parking lot and lost his nerve. College, when they'd talk on the phone until 3 in the morning about nothing at all. Deborah's diagnosis, when Malik started showing up every single Sunday without being asked, sitting with her through dialysis, so Angela could finally sleep after back-to-back night shifts. He knew about Deborah's diagnosis. What he didn't know, what nobody knew, was how deep the debt had actually gone. Angela made sure of that. She'd rather carry the weight of it alone in the dark than watch pity cross the face of the one person whose opinion of her mattered most. Then, 4 months before this story begins, everything changed in a single overnight shift. Angela picked up an extra shift covering the private wing at Grady, a floor reserved for patients who paid for privacy, the kind of overtime nobody on her regular unit wanted, because it meant dealing with entitled families and demanding visitors. Angela took it because the differential pay was good, And good pay meant one less sleepless night, doing math about her mother's bills. A man had collapsed at a downtown gala earlier that evening. Mild cardiac event, it would turn out, brought on by exhaustion, dehydration, and 11 months of not sleeping more than 4 hours a night while closing a hotel acquisition in Singapore. Not life-threatening, but frightening enough that his security team rushed him straight to Grady's ER instead of waiting for his personal physician to fly in from Miami. His name was Preston Marshall Cole. Angela didn't recognize him. She wasn't a woman who followed business news, or kept up with which billionaire owned which skyline. She just saw a man in his late 30s, sweating through the collar of a very expensive suit that somebody had cut off him in Triave, more scared than his composure was letting on. She did what she always did with every patient who walked, or in his case was wheeled through her doors. She treated him like a human being, not a headline. Sir, I need you to look at me. Right here. I need you to breathe with me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. You're safe. Nothing bad is happening to you right now. I promise you that. He gripped her hand like it was the only solid thing in the room. Preston Marshall Cole would later tell people that was the exact moment he fell in love with Angela Coleman. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, the kind of beautiful that didn't need a single accessory to prove it. It was because she was the first person in years who looked at him and saw a scared man instead of a bank account. Every doctor after that treated him like a liability to be managed. Angela treated him like a person to be steadied. His security detail, waiting outside in the hallway, had never seen their boss let a stranger hold his hand for that long. His chief of staff, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Carol who'd worked for Preston for 9 years, would later say it was the first time she'd ever seen him look genuinely relieved instead of merely composed. Angela finished her shift at 7 that morning, exhausted, and thought nothing more of the man in room 14. She'd treated hundreds of scared patients over the years. He was, to her, simply another one. A person who needed steadying at 2 in the morning, nothing more, nothing less. She drove home, checked on her mother, who was already up making grits despite Angela's protests that she should rest more, and fell asleep by 9 a.m., the curtains blacked out against the daylight. The way every night shift nurse in America learns to sleep. She had no idea that 4 floors up, in a hospital bed with a heart monitor still clipped to his finger, Preston Marshall Cole was asking his chief of staff to find out everything she could, respectfully, about the nurse who'd talked him down from the worst panic of his adult life. Preston Marshall Cole built his fortune in hospitality and commercial real estate, starting with a single boutique hotel in Miami his grandfather left him in a will nobody expected to matter, and turning it, over 18 relentless years, into a portfolio spanning 41 properties across 9 countries. Forbes put his net worth at $11 billion that year. Preston put it differently later, in a conversation Angela would never forget. He told her he'd trade every zero in that number for one more Sunday dinner with his mother, who died of ovarian cancer before he made his first million, before any of the money could do a single thing to save her. He asked for Angela specifically on his second shift back in recovery. Hospital policy said patients don't get to request specific nurses outside their assigned unit. Preston's foundation donated $800,000 to Grady's cardiac wing that same week. Angela never knew if the two things were connected until much later. And when she found out, she was furious with him for almost a full day. "You don't get to buy your way to me," she told him, arms crossed, standing at the foot of his hospital bed. "That's not how I work, Mr. Cole." "I didn't buy my way to you," he said. "I made a donation to a hospital that saved my life, and I asked a question through the proper channel that happened to get answered. I can't control what people do with generosity, Angela. I can only control what I mean by it." She didn't fully believe him, but she stayed in the room a little longer than her rounds required. Their first real date, 3 weeks after his discharge, was almost comically ordinary for a man worth $11 billion. Preston picked a small soul food restaurant in Old Fourth Ward that Angela's father used to take her mother to before he passed. A detail Preston hadn't known, and one that made Angela go quiet for a moment when she realized where they were. "Is this okay?" Preston asked, immediately reading her face. "We can go somewhere else. I just asked a local contact for an honest, unpretentious recommendation, not a tourist trap." No, Angela said, throat tight. No, it's perfect. You just accidentally picked the one place in Atlanta that would make me cry over cornbread. He reached across the table, not to hold her hand, just to slide the bread basket closer to her, and said, Then I'll take that as a win, and I promise not to ask why, unless you want to tell me. She told him. About her father. About Sunday dinners. About the 11 years since he'd been gone and how she still, occasionally, reached for her phone to call him before remembering. Preston listened to all of it without once checking his own phone, without once steering the conversation back toward himself, which Angela would later admit was the thing that actually impressed her most. Not the $11 billion, but a man who knew how to simply listen. Over the following month, Preston did something almost no one in his position ever bothered to do. He pursued her the slow way. Quiet dinners at restaurants without valet cameras out front, not helicopter rides to nowhere. Long phone calls after her shifts where he just let her vent about a hard night in the ER, not staged public appearances designed for someone else's magazine. He learned her mother's name within the first week. He learned she took her coffee black, no sugar, because sugar reminded her of a childhood she was trying to outrun the hard parts of. He learned about Malik, too, because Angela was honest about that from the very start, refusing to build anything on a foundation of omission. There's someone, she told him, 3 weeks in. Over coffee she'd insisted on paying for herself. It's complicated. It's old. It's never actually been anything, not officially. But it's real, Preston, and I won't pretend it isn't just because you're sitting across from me right now. Preston didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly, like a man used to negotiating for things worth having. Then I'll just have to be patient and better, he said. I happen to be good at both. What Angela didn't know yet, what she wouldn't find out for another 6 weeks, was exactly how deep her mother's medical debt had gone. Deborah had been quietly declined for a kidney transplant match not once, but twice. Not for medical reasons. Because a required deposit for the specialized out-of-state surgical team capable of performing her specific procedure was $11,000. Money Angela simply did not have, not after 2 years of dialysis copays and missed shifts and a car that kept breaking down at the worst possible times. Deborah hid the second rejection letter in a kitchen drawer, underneath the good silverware nobody used, for 6 weeks. She didn't want her daughter to carry one more thing. Angela found it by accident on a Sunday afternoon, doing dishes while her mother napped. She sat down on the kitchen floor, still holding a wet plate, and cried for the first time in over a year. The kind of crying that comes from a place so deep and so tired it barely makes a sound. That was the night she told Preston the truth. Not asking for help. Just needing one single person on this earth to know exactly how scared she was, because she'd been carrying it alone for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to set anything down. Preston listened. He didn't interrupt once. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that Angela almost apologized for saying too much. Then he made one phone call. 3 days later, Deborah Coleman had a surgical team, a confirmed transplant date, and a hospital bill reduced in full to $0. Angela didn't ask him to do it. When she found out, she called him in tears, not grateful tears at first but frightened ones. I can't accept this, Preston. It's too much. It changes everything between us. Don't you see that? Now I owe you something I can never repay. Preston's answer was simple, and it was the moment Angela started to understand what kind of man he actually was underneath $11 billion. You don't owe me anything, Angela. I didn't do it to change what's between us. I did it because a good woman's mother deserved to live, and I happen to have the ability to make sure of it. I'd have done the same for a stranger, if I'm honest. I just happened to love the daughter, which made it feel like more than it was. What you decide to do with your heart after this is entirely yours. I'm not buying you. I could never afford you even if I tried. While Preston's world moved through private jets and boardrooms in 4 different time zones, Malik Turner's world moved through 11th grade classrooms, a stack of ungraded essays on the Missouri Compromise, and Saturday morning basketball practice at a rec center with a scoreboard he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years running. Malik found out about Preston the way most of Atlanta eventually did. A photo on a local gossip page, Angela in a borrowed dress at a hospital fundraiser, laughing at something outside the frame, Preston beside her in a suit that cost more than Malik's car. The headline read, Miami Billionaire's Mystery Nurse. Malik didn't call Angela demanding answers. That wasn't who he was, and it never had been. He waited, the way he'd waited 17 patient years for almost everything with her, for her to bring it up herself. When she finally did, sitting in his car outside her mother's house, the exact same spot they'd parked 100 times since high school, engine off, radio low, Malik didn't get angry. He got quiet, in a way that scared Angela far more than shouting ever could have. Do you love him? Malik asked, staring straight ahead through the windshield. I don't know yet, Angela said, and it was the most honest thing she'd said out loud in weeks. I know what he's done for my mama. I know what that means to me, what it's always going to mean to me. I don't know if that's the same thing as love, Malik. I really don't. Malik nodded slowly, jaw tight. And what about what I've done for you? Angela didn't have an answer for that. Because what Malik had done for her couldn't be measured in a wire transfer or a phone call to a surgical team. He'd driven 3 hours round trip, every single Sunday, for 2 straight years, to sit with Deborah during dialysis so Angela could sleep after a night shift. He'd never once asked to be thanked for it. He just showed up week after week, rain or shine, because that's what love looked like to Malik Turner. Not grand gestures under string lights, but relentless, unglamorous, weekly presence. He'd never once told Angela he loved her. Not in 17 years. He was terrified that saying it out loud, and losing her anyway, would be worse than carrying the silence forever. That night, sitting in his car outside her mother's house, Malik almost said it. His mouth opened. The words sat right there, 17 years in the making. He didn't say them. Angela went inside and went to bed, not knowing that was the moment everything could have changed. If only one of them had been brave enough first. Preston proposed on a rooftop in Miami, 11 weeks after they first met, the entire city skyline glittering behind him. No cameras, no staged perfection, no press waiting in the wings. Just the two of them, and a man visibly nervous for the first time since Angela had known him, which she found more endearing than any of his 41 hotels combined. I know what I'm asking, he said down on one knee, hands actually trembling. I know there's a life in Atlanta that isn't mine to compete with, and I know I can't out history 17 years. I'm not asking you to forget any of it. I'm asking you to choose with your whole heart what kind of future you actually want to build, and I'm telling you that I want to build it with you, however that has to look. There were never any conditions on your mother's care, Angela. That was never a transaction, and it never will be one. This right here is just me asking. Angela said she needed time. Preston, unlike most men in his position, actually gave it to her. No pressure, no ultimatum, no dramatic countdown timer disguised as romance. He flew back to Miami the next morning and waited, and he didn't call, and he didn't text, just checking in, because he understood that real patience doesn't announce itself. 3 weeks later, Angela drove straight from a phone call with Preston, where she'd told him she was at least willing to seriously consider his proposal, to Malik's apartment. She needed to tell him before she told anyone else in her life. She owed him that much, after 17 years of him showing up for her without ever once asking for anything back. Malik opened the door already knowing, somehow, exactly why she'd come. Maybe it was her face. Maybe it was 17 years of reading every single one of her expressions like a second language. He asked you, Malik said. It wasn't a question. Yes. What did you say? I said I needed time. I came here because, Malik, I needed to know. I needed to hear it from you, whatever it is, before I make a decision that big. Because if you tell me right now that you love me, that you've always loved me, I don't know what I do with that information. But I need to know. I can't marry anybody, not even a good man like Preston, carrying around a question I never let myself ask you. Malik stood in his doorway for a long moment, 17 years of silence sitting behind his eyes, his hands still on the doorknob like he needed something to hold on to. Then he said the two words he had never once, in 17 years, allowed himself to say out loud. Ido. Angela didn't sleep that night. She sat on her mother's back porch until sunrise, wrapped in the same quilt Deborah had knitted her senior year of high school, holding both truths at once. A man who could guarantee her family's financial security for the rest of their lives. And a man who had already given her everything he had, which happened to be less money and infinitely more of himself than she had ever fully let herself receive. Deborah found her there at 6 in the morning, moving slowly on her cane, wrapped in her own robe against the early chill. "Baby, what in the world is going on out here?" Angela told her everything. Preston's proposal on the rooftop. Malik's confession in the doorway. The $11,000 that had once stood between her mother and a working kidney. The 17 years that had stood between Angela and the truth about her own heart, buried under a lifetime of being the strong one, the steady one, the one who didn't get to fall apart because somebody always needed her to hold it together. Deborah was quiet for a long time, watching the sun come up over the fence line. Then she said something Angela would carry with her for the rest of her life. "I didn't get a new kidney so my daughter could spend the rest of her days making sure she never has to worry about money again, Angela. I got a new kidney so I could be here long enough to watch you actually be happy. The real kind, not the safe kind. Those are not the same thing, baby. Don't you dare confuse them. Not for me. Not for anybody." Angela gave herself 48 hours. She told both men the exact same thing. She needed the time, uninterrupted, no calls, no pressure, just silence long enough to actually hear her own thoughts for the first time in months without somebody else's voice, however kind, crowding them out. Preston respected it instantly. He always did. Malik respected it too, though Angela could hear, in the careful evenness of his voice, that it nearly killed him to wait even one more day. Angela spent those 48 hours doing something neither man expected. She went back to work. 2 full overnight shifts in the ER, back to back, the place she'd always gone to remember exactly who she was underneath everybody else's expectations of her. Patient, daughter, girlfriend, decision to be made. On the first night, a teenager came in with a broken wrist from a bike accident, his mother frantic beside him, and Angela caught herself thinking of Malik. The way he'd probably ice a kid's wrist at practice and drive him home himself rather than wait for a parent stuck in traffic. No fuss, no complaint, just quiet competence. She caught herself smiling at the thought in the middle of setting a splint, and one of her co-workers asked what was funny. Angela just shook her head and said nothing, because she wasn't ready yet to say it out loud. On the second night, a woman came into the ER mid-50s, no insurance card in her wallet, a husband who'd left years before, completely alone in the waiting room with nobody to hold her hand while she waited on test results that would, thankfully, turn out to be nothing serious. Angela sat with her anyway, on an unpaid break, holding a total stranger's hand for 45 minutes, because that's who Angela Coleman had been long before Preston Cole ever walked through her ER doors, and long before Malik Turner ever sat 2 seats away from her in algebra class. The woman, whose name was Patricia, asked Angela at one point if she had someone waiting for her at home. Angela laughed softly and said it was complicated. Patricia, hooked to a blood pressure monitor, still managed to raise an eyebrow. "Baby, in my experience, it's only complicated when you already know the answer and you're scared of it." Angela didn't say anything back, but she thought about that sentence for the rest of the night. Somewhere in that quiet room, holding a stranger's trembling hand, Angela finally understood her own answer. It was never really about the ring. It was never about the money, or even about the $11,000 that had once felt like the entire weight of the world sitting on her chest. It was about which version of her own life she recognized, truly recognized, down in her bones, when she closed her eyes and imagined herself 20 years from now. Angela called Preston first. She owed him the truth delivered in person, and he deserved to hear it before anyone else in her life did, given everything he'd done without ever once asking for anything in return. They met at a diner in Atlanta, Preston's choice, not a hotel restaurant, not anywhere with photographers pretending to be coincidental, just a booth by the window. 2 cups of coffee going cold, and $11 billion sitting quietly across the table from a woman about to turn it down. "I love you enough to tell you the truth," Angela said, hands wrapped around her mug for something to hold on to. "You are the finest man I have ever met who didn't grow up alongside me. What you did for my mother, I will be grateful for until the day I die, Preston, and that's not going to change no matter what I say next. But I can't marry you. Not because you're not enough, God knows you're more than enough for any woman lucky enough to have you. It's because my heart already belongs to somebody who's been quietly building a life with me since before either of us had the words for it. And if I'm honest with myself, some part of me knew that the entire time. I just needed to be brave enough to finally admit it out loud. Preston was quiet for a long moment, looking down at his coffee. Then he did something that told Angela, once and for all, exactly what kind of man he really was underneath everything Forbes ever wrote about him. He smiled, genuinely, painfully but genuinely, and said, "Then he's the luckiest man in the state of Georgia, and I mean that. And Angela, the surgical team, your mother's care, none of that was ever conditional. And it never will be, not one single day of her life. That was never a deal between us. That was just me, doing right by a woman who deserved every bit of it, regardless of what she chose to do with her heart afterward." He paid for both coffees. He shook her hand, warm and steady, and he walked out of that diner with more dignity than most men manage on their very best day, let alone on what had to be one of his worst. Angela found Malik exactly where she knew he'd be on a Sunday evening, at the rec center, alone, shooting free throws under a scoreboard that still didn't work, the gym empty and echoing around him. He saw her walk through the door and stopped mid-shot, the ball bouncing away across the hardwood floor, completely forgotten. "You didn't call," he said, voice careful, guarded. "I wanted to tell you in person." Malik braced himself the way a man braces for a hit he's already certain is coming, shoulders squared, jaw tight. Angela crossed the gym floor slowly, stopped directly in front of him, close enough to see 17 years of hope and fear both sitting in his eyes at once, and said the only thing left in the world that actually mattered. "I choose you, Malik. I've always chosen you, if I'm honest, every single time, in every single way that counted, long before I even understood that's what I was doing. I just needed 17 years, and one very good billionaire, to finally understand it myself." Malik didn't say anything at first. He just pulled her into him, the kind of hold that only comes from someone who has been waiting so long, so quietly, to finally exhale. "I don't have what he has," Malik said quietly into her hair, his voice rough. "I never will, Angela. Not even close. You gave me Sundays for 2 straight years when I had nothing left in me to give back to anybody," Angela said, pulling back just enough to look him in the eye. "You gave me 17 years of showing up, every single time, without once asking for a thing in return. I've had money offered to me exactly one time in my entire life, Malik. I've had you my whole life. There was never actually a contest between the two of you, not really. I just needed to stop being so afraid of choosing the thing that already belonged to me." They stood there a long while, right there at half court, neither of them in any hurry to be anywhere else in the world. Malik finally pulled back just enough to look at her properly. 17 years, he said, shaking his head slowly, something between a laugh and disbelief in his voice. "You know how many times I almost told you? Junior prom. Your college graduation. When you wore that green dress and I damn near lost my nerve in front of your whole family. The night your mama got her diagnosis and you cried in my truck for 2 hours and I just sat there rubbing your back like a coward, because I was so scared that if I said what I actually felt, you'd think I was trying to take advantage of you being upset. I remember that night," Angela said softly. "I remember thinking, if he doesn't say something right now, I'm going to have to be the one to say it. And then I chickened out too." "Two cowards," Malik said, "wasting 17 good years." "We're not wasting any more of them," Angela said. He kissed her then, right there under the broken scoreboard, in an empty gym on a Sunday evening, and it wasn't cinematic or perfect. His hands still smelled like the rubber of the basketball. There was sweat on his collar from practice earlier that morning, and somewhere outside a car alarm was going off in the parking lot. It was, Angela would say later, the single most honest moment of her entire life. Word travels fast in a neighborhood like East Atlanta, and within a week, everybody had an opinion about Angela Coleman turning down a billionaire for a schoolteacher making $51,000 a year. Her Aunt Rosalind, never one to keep quiet, cornered her after Sunday service. "Baby, I love you, but have you lost your natural mind? A man offered to take care of you and your mama for the rest of your natural lives, and you told him no for a man who coaches free basketball on the weekends." Angela had heard some version of this question a dozen times that week, from coworkers, from church members, from a cousin she hadn't spoken to in 2 years who suddenly had a lot to say on Facebook. She'd expected it, honestly. What she hadn't expected was how steady she felt answering it. Auntie Rose, Preston is a good man, and I mean that with my whole chest. But being taken care of and being loved aren't always the same thing, and I spent 30 years of my life not understanding the difference. I do now. Rosalind studied her for a long moment, then finally softened. Well, as long as you're sure, baby. As long as you're sure. I'm sure, Angela said. And for the first time in months, she actually was. Malik faced his own version of it, his fellow teachers ribbing him gently in the break room, a few of his students, who'd somehow heard the whole story through the neighborhood grapevine, asking him half-joking if it was true he'd beat a billionaire for his girl. Malik just laughed it off every time, same answer, no matter who asked. Wasn't a competition, he'd say. She just finally saw what was in front of her the whole time. Deborah Coleman, for her part, never once second-guessed her daughter's decision, not for a single day. She'd tell anyone who asked, and plenty of people asked, that she'd rather watch her daughter build a modest, honest life with a man who showed up in the rain than a lavish one with a man who merely showed up when it was convenient. Not that Preston was ever that man. Deborah made sure to say that too, every time, because fairness mattered to her. But there was a difference, she always added, between a good man and the right man, and only Angela could know which one Malik was to her. Angela and Malik married the following spring, in Deborah Coleman's backyard in East Atlanta. Under string lights, Malik hung himself over 2 weekends, in front of 40 guests instead of 400. Deborah walked her daughter halfway down the makeshift aisle of folding chairs before her strength gave out. And Malik, without a single word needing to pass between any of them, simply walked over, took her other arm, and finished the walk with both women at once, one on each side of him. There was no elaborate registry, no press coverage, no 11-carat ring catching the light for cameras that weren't there. Just a plain gold band, exactly the one that had been sitting quietly in Angela's right coat pocket the whole time, waiting patiently for her to be brave enough to finally choose it. Deborah Coleman is, as of this telling, 5 years post-transplant and in full health, thoroughly spoiling her first grandchild, Malik and Angela's daughter, born 18 months into their marriage. Sources close to the family say she has her father's patience and her mother's stubborn, unshakable heart, and that she has already, at not yet 2 years old, developed strong opinions about the rec center scoreboard, which her father finally fixed the week before her christening. Preston Marshall Cole never publicly commented on the engagement that never quite happened. But 2 years later, his foundation quietly funded a full transplant assistance program at Grady Memorial Hospital, covering surgical deposit costs for families who couldn't afford them, exactly the way Deborah Coleman once couldn't. No press release, no announcement, no plaque with his name anywhere on it. Somebody at the hospital leaked it anyway, the way these things eventually get out. When a reporter finally reached him for comment, Preston gave one of the only public statements he ever made about that entire chapter of his life. Because a good woman once taught me the difference between being loved for what you have, and being loved for exactly who you are, underneath all of it. I couldn't buy that lesson, no matter how many zeros I had behind my name. But I could make sure it goes on to help somebody else who needs it. Angela Coleman never met another billionaire again. She never needed to. She'd already found out, the hard way, and then the genuinely beautiful way, exactly what she was worth. And it was never, not for one single second of her life, a number that anybody else got to write down for her.
Thanks for tuning in and watching to the end. Drop your comments below.